Today we'll be continuing in First Maccabees. And First Maccabees really is our best and oldest historical account from this time period. Second Maccabees was later, and it draws from First Maccabees for a bit of its stuff. Josephus sometimes is just like reading First Maccabees and his interpretation of it. So this is our primary source that we're going to be focusing on. And if you remember last week, things just kind of went on. New people, but the same problems. Antiochus the Fourth, Epiphanes, the one who started all the mess, he made his son king instead of his nephew Demetrius, who was supposed to be the king. And that caused some serious problems in the kingdom, especially when Demetrius, the one who should have been king, Antiochus's nephew, escaped from Rome, returned to Antioch, and had his cousin, Antiochus V, killed. So Demetrius is now the king of the Seleucid. I don't know if you can even call it an empire anymore at this point. It's becoming smaller, becoming weaker, and it doesn't really have an end in this story. We're not going to see a catastrophic close to their story. They just kind of wither and become an unimportant kingdom that's absorbed into Rome like everything else. But Demetrius is their current king, and the current high priest in Israel is yet another liberal, yet another Hellenist who wants to adopt Greek customs, and his name is Alchemist. And Alchemist, the high priest, convinced Demetrius to send an army to kill Judas Maccabeus. He says, this rebel is going throughout the land. He killed all my friends. He's a terrible problem. Please, won't you help me? So Demetrius is sending an army. Well, the first thing he did, which we talked about briefly last week, is he sent a man named Bacchides. And Bacchides came down with a pretty good-sized army and sent a message to Judas saying, why don't you come over here and meet with me and we can all be friends? Judas did not trust him and did not meet with him. But some people did. Some of the other members of the conservative party, they were called Hasidians was one of the names for them. But about 60 of the Hasidians who would agree with Judas and what he was trying to do went over to Bacchides, and Bacchides killed all 60 of those people. After that point, no more came to him for obvious reasons. But after capturing and killing a few more people and telling everyone to obey Alchemist, the high priest, Bacchides considered his work done, thought that's good enough, and returned to Antioch. So didn't really kill Judas, didn't solve the problem. And civil war continued between Alchemist and Judas until Alchemist finally went back to Demetrius and asked for help again. And that brings us to our handout this morning. Then the king, Demetrius, sent Nicanor, one of his honored princes, who hated and detested Israel. Nicanor was one of his closest friends, one of the people who had escaped with him when he came from Rome. He commanded him to destroy the people. So Nicanor came to Jerusalem with a large force and treacherously sent to Judas and his brothers this peaceable message: let there be no fighting between me and you. I shall come with a few men to see you face to face in peace. So he came to Judas, and they greeted one another peaceably. So Nicanor came with a smaller group, more like an actual peaceful encounter. But the enemy were ready to seize Judas. It became known to Judas that Nicanor had come to him with treacherous intent, and he was afraid of him and would not meet him again. When Nicanor learned that his plan had been disclosed, he went out to meet Judas in battle near Kafar Salama. About 500 men of the army of Nicanor fell, and the rest fled into the city of David. Now, here's a map of everything we've talked about today so far, really. We have Bacchides coming south. He's the red line, the red dotted line, going south from the top of the map all the way down to Jerusalem. Then he goes back up to Bir Zaith, and that's where he treacherously kills those 60 men who go to him, who respond to his offer of peace, and then he returns to Syria, to Antioch. And then that smaller red dotted line down there is Nicanor coming up from Jerusalem to meet Judas in battle. And that's where the battle happens, and then Nicanor loses that battle and retreats back down to Jerusalem. Now, there's a little bit of a different story told in 2nd Maccabees about Judas and Nicanor. According to 2nd Maccabees, they were actually friends. They hit it off. They liked each other. Started to get on real personal terms. And Nicanor received a threat from his government saying, you need to take care of this problem, and you need to take care of it quickly. And for that reason, changed his tune. And whether it really was that way or if it was just that way because Nicanor wanted it to look that way, it's hard to tell with so much time in between us and them. But Nicanor, at this point, after his defeat by Judas, Nicanor went up to Mount Zion. And some of the priests came out of the sanctuary, and some of the elders of the people, to greet him peaceably and to show him the whole burnt offering that was being offered for the king. And this was something that the Israelites did when they were under the authority of a larger kingdom. And this is what they did for the Romans as well. They would have a sacrifice each day for Caesar. They would pray and offer a sacrifice for whoever the king was that was ruling them. And they showed Nicanor this as a way to demonstrate that they were loyal to Demetrius. They made a sacrifice for him. But Nicanor mocked them and derided them and defiled them and spoke arrogantly. And in anger he swore this oath: unless Judas and his army are delivered into my hands this time, then if I return safely, I will burn up this house. And he went out in great anger. So he threatens the temple. He says, if I don't catch Judas and I come back here safely, I am going to destroy the temple. And around this time, we have another very interesting little story in the book of 2nd Maccabees. And remember, 2nd Maccabees is the book that records the really gruesome and horrible stories about the martyrs that died under Antiochus's persecution. And he has another martyr story here, except it's not really a martyr story, but he tells it like one. He says, a certain Razus one of the elders of Jerusalem, was denounced to Nicanor as a man who loved his fellow citizens and was very well thought of, and for his good will was called Father of the Jews. For in former times, when there was no mingling with the Gentiles, he had been accused of Judaism. And for Judaism, he had with all zeal risked body and life. So this is one of those conservative people, like Mattathias, like Judas and his brothers, who stood against Hellenism. Nicanor, wishing to exhibit the enmity that he had for the Jews, to really teach them a lesson, sent more than 500 soldiers to arrest Razus, for he thought that by arresting him, he would do them an injury. And the reason he sent a large number is because he was kind of holed up in a tower. When the troops were about to capture the tower and were forcing the door of the courtyard, they ordered that fire be brought and the doors burned. And being surrounded, Razus fell upon his own sword, preferring to die nobly rather than to fall into the hands of sinners and suffer outrages unworthy of his noble birth. So, not exactly the same kind of heroism that the martyrs showed. Taking King Saul as an example, who fell on his sword rather than suffer the disgrace of being captured. And during this time, this became a view that it was a noble thing to die rather than fall into enemy hands, like by your own hand, to commit suicide. But when Saul did that, it was an act of cowardice. It was not an act of nobility. He did not prevent his body being disgraced. He did not prevent damage being done to the reputation of God and to Israel. All he avoided by killing himself was personal suffering. Razus did not avoid personal suffering. In the heat of the struggle, he did not hit exactly. So he held his sword in front of him and tried to fall on it, tried to drive it upward. That's what they would have done, under their rib cage, trying to hit their heart or something else very vital. He fell upon his sword, but because there was a struggle going on, he did not hit exactly. He missed. So he wounded himself really seriously, but didn't die. And the crowd was now rushing in through the doors. So he bravely, the writer of 2nd Maccabees is very in favor of what Razus did. He bravely ran up on the wall to the top of the tower and manfully threw himself down into the crowd. But as they quickly drew back, a space opened, and he fell in the middle of the empty space. Still alive and aflame with anger, he rose, and though his blood gushed forth and his wounds were severe, he ran through the crowd, and standing upon a steep rock, with his blood now completely drained from him, he tore out his entrails, took them with both hands, and hurled them at the crowd, calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to give them back to him again. This was the manner of his death. So, yeah, right? At least he avoided suffering, though. This is a corruption of that idea that it is good to endure suffering for God, to be a martyr. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. But this, I mention it now because this became a very strong Jewish sentiment among some groups. And we see some mass suicides that took place later in groups of Jews that were afraid they were going to be captured. It was a way of making a statement. I don't care about my own life as much as I care about my cause. So But Nicanor went out to fight Judas again. He went out from Jerusalem and encamped in Beth Horon, and the Syrian army joined him. So he hadn't had a big force with him up to this point, but the army came down and joined with him, and he led it against Judas. And Judas encamped in Adasa with 3,000 men. Then Judas prayed and said, when the messengers from the king spoke blasphemy, praying to God, talking about the days of Hezekiah, your angel went forth and struck down 1,805, 185,000 of the Assyrians. So also crush this army before us today. Let the rest learn that Nicanor has spoken wickedly against your sanctuary, and judge him according to this wickedness. So the armies met in battle on the 13th day of the month of Adar. And Judas encouraged his men by telling them a dream that he had had, at least according to 2nd Maccabees. He said in his dream, in a vision, he saw Onias, the old high priest who had been murdered. Onias, a good and noble man, speaking to a man with gray hair and dignity and of marvelous majesty and authority. And Onias spoke to Judas and said, this is a man who loves the brothers and prays much for the people and the holy city, Jeremiah, the prophet of God. And so Jeremiah stretched out his hand and gave to Judas a golden sword. And as he gave it to him, he addressed him thus, take this holy sword, a gift from God, with which you will strike down your adversaries. So they fought. The army of Nicanor was crushed, and he himself was the first to fall in the battle. There's some disagreement about that. Most likely, 2nd Maccabees is correct here, and they just found his body after the battle and aren't sure exactly when he died. But when his army saw that Nicanor had fallen, they threw down their arms and fled. The Jews pursued them a day's journey from Asada as far as Gazara, and as they followed, kept sounding the battle call on the trumpets. And men came out of all the villages of Judea round about, and they outflanked the enemy and drove them back to their pursuers, so that they all fell by the sword. Not even one of them was left. Possible exaggeration, but yeah, the battle happened. They fled that way. And all the little green arrows are the villagers coming and harassing them as they try to flee, driving them back to the Jewish soldiers chasing them and just decimating them all the way. Then the Jews seized the spoils and the plunder, and they cut off Nicanor's head and the right hand that he had so arrogantly stretched out when he made that threat against the temple. And they brought them and displayed them just outside Jerusalem. The people rejoiced greatly and celebrated that day as a day of great gladness. And they decreed that this day should be celebrated each year on the 13th day of Adar. So the land of Judah had rest for a few days, for a short time. And this right here is where 2nd Maccabees ends. This is where he chooses to end the story on a high point, with a victory, one of Judas's greatest victories. But the story did go on, as life does. And what we have here in First Maccabees, it shows a little bit of the political motivation behind First Maccabees. You can really tell that the writer of First Maccabees is pro-Hasmonean, pro-Judas's family. In fact, one time when a group of Israelites suffered a defeat, he says that they were defeated because Judas and his family were the ones to whom the salvation of Israel had been entrusted, that they were the saviors of Israel. And we see in this passage he is also very pro-Roman. And I mean, so was Judas. Thinking about where they are, what has happened so far with Rome at this time, Rome is the biggest helper they've had. Not in an intentional way, not in a direct way, but Rome is the good nation. They're the good guys in this picture. Now Judas heard of the fame of the Romans, that they were very strong and were well disposed toward all who made an alliance with them, that they pledged friendship to those who came to them, and that they were very strong. Those whom they wished to help and to make kings, they make kings, and those whom they wish they depose, and they have been greatly exalted. And we've seen them do this. Typically, they help the underdog. They helped the cities of Greece. They helped Egypt, whoever is losing. And they did this to keep their enemies weak, to maintain their position as the strongest, most dominant nation. Yet, for all of this, not one of them has put on a crown or worn purple as a mark of pride. But they have built for themselves a Senate chamber, and every day 320 senators constantly deliberate concerning the people to govern them well. They trust one man each year to rule over them and to control all their land. They all heed the one man, and there is no envy or jealousy among them. And yeah, they had a republic. They had a system of government that was, apart from the fact that it was controlled by the upper class and the rich basically ruled, the poor weren't given much of a vote. It was very similar to our government today. And the rest of the nations and the Jewish people here specifically admired it very much. So Judas sent Eupolemus, son of John, son of Achos, and Jason, son of Eleazar. He chose them and sent them to Rome to establish friendship and alliance, and to free themselves from the yoke, for they saw that the kingdom of the Greeks was completely enslaving Israel. They went to Rome, a very long journey, and they entered the Senate chamber and spoke as follows. Judas, who is also called Maccabeus, and his brothers, and the people of the Jews have sent us to you to establish alliance and peace with you, that we may be enrolled as your allies and friends. The proposal pleased them, and this is a copy of the letter that they wrote in reply on bronze tablets and sent to Jerusalem to remain with them there as a memorial of peace and alliance. And you can read that for yourself if you want to, but basically they say, we will support the Jews if they have a fight. The Jews will support us. We won't give supplies to each other's enemies. And we're writing to King Demetrius to tell him, that second paragraph down there, concerning the wrongs that King Demetrius is doing to them, to the Jews, we have written to him as follows. Why have you made your yoke heavy upon our friends and allies, the Jews? If now they appeal again for help against you, we will defend their rights and fight you on sea and on land. So the Romans promised to help the Jews. That's amazing. That's a huge victory for Judas, apparently. But what do they actually say? If the Jews complain to us again, we will fight against you. So when Demetrius gets this message, his response is not to think we'd better leave the Jews alone then. His response is to say we have to crush them completely right now and not give this a chance to happen. When Demetrius heard that Nicanor and his army had fallen in battle, he sent Bacchides and Alcimus into the land of Judah a second time. So the first general he sent in, along with Alcimus the high priest, and with them the right wing of the army. So they came down from the north. Judas's army went up to meet them from Jerusalem. They went by the road that leads to Gilgal and camped against Mesaloth in Arbela, and they took it and killed many people. In the first month of the 152nd year, they encamped against Jerusalem. Then they marched off and went to Berea with 20,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 cavalry. Now Judas was encamped in Elasa, and with him were 3,000 picked men. That's where the blue arrow ends, right there at Elasa. When they saw the huge number of the enemy forces, they were greatly frightened, and many slipped away from the camp, until no more than 800 of them were left. When Judas saw that his army had slipped away and the battle was imminent, he was crushed in spirit, for he had no time to assemble them. He became faint, but he said to those who were left, "Let us rise and go up against our enemies. We may be able to fight them." But they tried to dissuade him, tried to convince him otherwise, saying, "We are not able. Let us rather save our own lives now, and let us come back with our brothers and fight them. We are too few." But Judas said, "Far be it from us to do such a thing as to flee from them. If our time has come, let us die bravely for our brothers and leave no cause to question our honor." So just as we see a bit of a difference between the man who committed suicide today and the earlier martyrs that he was trying to emulate, we see a little bit of a difference in attitude. The Judas now and the Judas who started out. It's not for the glory of God anymore. It is for their honor. It is for their reputation, so that men will remember them as people of courage. And I have a little bit of a diagram about how this battle went. It says, the army of Bacchides marched out from the camp and took its stand for the encounter. The cavalry was divided into two companies, and the slingers and the archers went ahead of the army, as did all the chief warriors. Bacchides was on the right wing. Flanked by the two companies, the phalanx advanced to the sound of the trumpets, and the men with Judas also blew their trumpets. The earth was shaken by the noise of the armies, and the battle raged from morning till evening. So the armies met each other. Judas saw that Bacchides and the strength of his army were on the right. Then all the stout-hearted men went with him, Judas and his elite force, and they crushed the right wing, and he pursued them as far as Mount Azotus. So starting to have some success, defeating not the whole army, but this specific section of the army and pursuing them. It's the red arrows there. So yeah, Judas's army split here, and so did the Seleucid army. Part of Judas's army is back fighting the main group of the Seleucids, and Judas's elite force with him is going after the right wing. When those on the left wing saw that the right wing was crushed, they turned and followed close behind Judas and his men. So the right wing was weakened, driven back. Judas pursued them. The left wing left some people behind to keep the rest of Judas's army where it was, but a lot of them went off and followed Judas, went the same direction he did. And as a result, Judas's army, where he was, the group he was with, was crushed between the men he was pursuing and the men who came behind him. They were attacked on both sides. And at that point, it was over. The battle became desperate, and many on both sides were wounded and fell. Judas also fell. Judas also fell, and the rest fled. Then Jonathan and Simon took Judas their brother and buried him in the tomb of their fathers at Modin, and wept for him. And all Israel made great lamentation for him. They mourned many days and said, "How is the mighty fallen, the Savior of Israel?" Now the rest of the acts of Judas and his wars and the brave deeds that he did and his greatness have not been recorded, for they were very many. And that's as far as we'll go today. Any questions? Oh, what year exactly? I haven't written that down. I could check on it, but not from where I'm standing. Yeah, I haven't been giving the years because so much of this happens in a condensed period of time, what we're going over. But I want to say the 160s BC is around the time period we're in. Let's go ahead and close in prayer. Father, thank you for the examples, for the warnings of history. Help us to trust in you, but help us not to cross the line between faith in you and presumption, trying to force your hand, or caring more about our glory, our reputation, our victory than your victory. Help us not to be driven by the desire to achieve or the desire to be great, but to obey you, to submit to you, to be wise, and see clearly what you want us to do. And if that thing is to sacrifice ourselves, even if it is to die, help us to face it gladly. Thank you for the greatness of the story that we're a part of, that we get to be involved in as your people. help us to be faithful to the cause to which you have called us. In Jesus' name, amen.